I woke up in a world that smelled of ozone and expensive cologne, but it wasn't mine. Not yet. They say when you transmigrate, you're supposed to get a second chance at love or a kingdom. I got a cubicle in Manhattan and a boss who views human beings as line items on a spreadsheet. I realized within 60 seconds that my life in this past didn't depend on the face staring back at me in the glass of the server room door. It depended on the cold, hard logic of the architecture I built. I'm the architect. And the man who thinks he owns me is about to find out that a foundation built on theft eventually collapses under its own weight.
Darkness isn't empty. In a place like Sterling Global, the darkness is heavy with the scent of floor wax and the quiet hum of servers processing millions of dollars in misappropriated funds. I knew exactly where the server rack was, 6 paces past the mahogany desk where Marcus Sterling once sat, laughing as he signed the paperwork that effectively diverted my mother's healthcare fund into his research vehicle account.
Every step I took on the marble floor felt like a gunshot in the silence. I wasn't just walking through an office. I was walking through the crime scene of my own life. I could feel the light from the server rack reflecting off my glasses, tiny green and red blinking LEDs that looked like the eyes of predatory animals. Greg was there, 3 desks away. I could hear the rhythmic, shallow breathing of a man who knows he's doing something wrong, but doesn't have the spine to stop. Greg, my cousin, the IT director who traded family loyalty for a frozen berry Porsche and a corner office with a view of Central Park. He lacks professional foresight. He thinks security is about passwords. He doesn't realize that security is about the people you've stepped on.
My screen flickered. A single line of text appeared in the terminal. I see you, architect. Greg. My heart didn't just beat, it hammered against my ribs like a prisoner trying to break down a door. He wasn't just monitoring the network, he was hunting. He had been waiting for me to finish the upload so he could trap me in the act. I had exactly 60 seconds before the system locked down, and the relocation specialists, those hired fixers Marcus keeps on retainer, arrived to handle the discrepancy. I didn't run. That's what a guilty man does. An intellectual man stays. I slipped past Greg's cubicle, the smell of his cheap, burnt coffee filling my lungs. I was so close I could see the sweat on the back of his neck. He was looking for a hacker on a screen. He wasn't looking for the shadow standing 3 inches behind him. The rain began to lash against the windows of the 40th floor, a silver curtain over Manhattan. This city doesn't wash things clean. It just hides the grime until the storm gets too big to ignore. I reached the stairwell, the heavy iron door clicking shut behind me with a finality that felt like a gavel hitting a block. My breath was ragged, but my mind was a cold machine. I needed to focus on the research vehicle, Marcus's favorite little toy. In the world of high finance, you don't just steal money. You misappropriate it through layers of intellectual bankruptcy. Marcus didn't just take the cash. He used a reverse vesting scheme on the employee pension fund. He promised everyone a piece of the future while he was liquidating their present. He created a shell company, Sterling Innovations LLC, and hired it to consult for our firm at a rate of $10,000 an hour. What was the consultation? Nothing. It was a vacuum. A digital straw reaching into the healthcare accounts of 300 families to pay for a frozen berry Porsche and a summer home in the Hamptons. He called it executive discretion. I call it financial sabotage.
I remember sitting in the audit meeting 6 months ago. Marcus leaned over the map of our quarterly projections, his voice like velvet, as he asked me if I truly thought I could rewrite his laws. He smelled of aged scotch and arrogance. Elias, he'd said, tapping his gold pen against the table, capitalism isn't about being fair. It's about being first. I wasn't first then, but I'm the only one left in the building now. I sat on the cold concrete step of the 38th floor, my burner phone tethered to the server drive. The unjust enrichment loophole is a beautiful thing when used by a man with nothing left to lose. In the state of New York, if a corporate officer diverts promised bonuses for personal assets, those assets don't belong to him anymore. They belong to the victims.
I began the reroute. It wasn't just a transfer, it was a surgical strike. I wasn't just taking the money back, I was deauthorizing Marcus's entire existence. Every cent he spent on that car, every dollar he funneled into his private security, the fixers, was being flagged as a fraudulent conveyance. I watched the progress bar. 45%, 46%. My mind flashed to the hospital, to the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the life support machines that Marcus decided weren't a priority for the company insurance plan this year. He told the board it was streamlining costs. I watched him say it while wearing a watch that cost more than my mother's kidney transplant.
The banker in my head, the one who understands the cold cruelty of the numbers, started laughing. He's intellectually bankrupt. He thinks his wealth is a fortress. He doesn't realize I'm not just knocking on the door. I'm rewriting the deed to the land the fortress is built on. He thinks a $5,000 suit makes him a king. I'm going to show him that in the dark, a king is just a target with a bigger price tag. The hospital didn't smell like the office. The office smelled of mahogany and lies. The hospital smelled of bleach, ozone, and the cold metallic tang of impending finality. I burst through the glass doors of St. Jude's Medical, my boots squeaking on the linoleum floors. Every squeak felt like a countdown.
I ignored the triage nurse. I didn't have a medical ID. I had an encrypted drive and a heart that felt like it was about to vibrate out of my chest. I hit the elevator button. 4, 4, 4, come on! The numbers on the display crawled with agonizing slowness. I watched my reflection in the brushed steel of the elevator doors. I didn't recognize the man staring back. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the red of a man who hasn't slept in 3,000 hours of overtime. I reached room 412. My mother lay there, a fragile landscape of glass and tubes. The heart monitors beep, beep, beep. It was the only music left in my world. But beside her bed stood a man in a charcoal suit. Not a doctor. One of Marcus's relocation specialists. A fixer. He didn't move. He just looked at his watch. I ignored the triage nurse. I didn't have a medical ID. I had an encrypted drive and a heart that felt like it was about to... "You're late, Elias," he said, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "Marcus wants the drive. He says if you hand it over, the machines stay on. If you don't, well, the hospital is having some billing issues today." The rage wasn't a hot fire. It was a cold, sub-zero liquid. Marcus hadn't just stolen the money. He had preemptively jammed the hospital's payment portal. He was holding her life hostage, using the very system I had built to protect the company's assets. Intellectual romance? No, this was an intellectual execution. I didn't hand him the drive. I sat at the small plastic table in the corner of the room and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer velocity of the data I was about to unleash. "You have 30 seconds before I lock you out," the fixer said, stepping closer. "I don't need 30 seconds, I whispered. I already initiated the reclaim protocol from the stairwell. The fixer's phone buzzed. Then the hospital administrator's phone at the nurse's station buzzed. Then every screen in the hallway flickered. I didn't just pay the bill. I used the unjust enrichment loophole to trigger a mandatory asset liquidation. Because Marcus had used diverted pension funds to buy his Porsche and his Manhattan penthouse, those assets were legally categorized as stolen property the moment I flagged the fraud. I didn't just take his money.
I forced the legal system to automatically sell his assets to the highest bidder, which, through a series of shell companies I'd set up, happened to be the hospital's charity foundation. The fixer looked at his phone. His face went gray. My account, it's empty. Not empty, I said, finally looking up. It's been misappropriated back to the people you took it from. Your salary for the last 5 years was paid out of the Research Vehicle Fund. As of 10 seconds ago, you're not just unemployed, you're an accomplice to a felony. The sound of the heart monitor changed. It wasn't faster, it was steadier. The billing denied red light on the door turned a soft, calming green. But then, the plot twist hit. My mother's hand moved. She gripped my wrist with a strength she shouldn't have had. Her eyes opened, not with the fog of sedation, but with the clarity of a predator. "Elias," she whispered, her voice rasping. "You shouldn't have used the reclaim protocol. You just told the collective exactly where we are."
The fixer wasn't Marcus's man. He was theirs, and I had just given them the keys to the kingdom. The reckoning was just the beginning. The collective has spent decades watching from the shadows of Manhattan. Join the hunt before you become the prey. I thought I was saving her from a greedy boss. I didn't realize I was waking up the person who designed the cage in the first place. The silence in the hospital room didn't just hang there. It felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. My mother's grip on my wrist was like iron. This wasn't the woman who had spent months fading away in a bed of white sheets and blue plastic tubes. This was someone else. Someone who spoke about the collective like it was a god she had served and betrayed.
I looked at the fixer. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He was backing away, his eyes fixed on my mother's face as if he'd seen a ghost. His phone dropped from his hand, clattering on the linoleum. The screen was still flickering with the asset seizure alerts I had triggered. "You don't understand, Elias," she rasped, her eyes burning with a cold blue light that matched the monitors. Marcus Sterling was never the architect. He was the distraction. The greedy little man in the expensive suit was just a firewall. You spent all your energy breaking him down, and in doing so,
You've deactivated the only thing that was hiding us from the people who actually run this city. The banker in my head finally went silent. The numbers didn't matter anymore. The unjust enrichment loophole I had used wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a beacon. By forcing the system to liquidate Marcus's assets, I had bypassed the corporate security layers and plugged directly into the central ledger of the collective, the underground network of CEOs and shadow investors who treat the global economy like a private game of chess. Marcus Sterling was intellectually bankrupt, yes, but he was also a hostage. He had been misappropriating those funds not just for his Porsche, but to pay a protection dividend to keep the collective from coming for his soul. And I had just cut off their supply.
The transition happened in a heartbeat. I wasn't at the hospital anymore. I was back at the docks, the fog rolling in from the Hudson River like a shroud. Marcus was there, kneeling in the dirt, his $5,000 suit ruined by the grime of the shipping port. The authorities were behind him, but they weren't moving. They were waiting for me. "You did it," Marcus hissed, his voice cracking. "You dismantled it all. My cars, my homes, my name. It's all gone. Are you happy, architect?"
Does your mother's life feel worth the wreckage of mine? I stood over him, my hands in my pockets. The rain was a silver curtain, blurring the line between justice and revenge. "It was never about being happy, Marcus," I said, my voice like velvet against the sound of the crashing waves. "It was about professional foresight. You thought you could rewrite the laws of human value. I just reminded you that
every debt eventually comes due. I pulled out my phone one last time. I didn't send a text. I didn't call the police. I simply clicked a button labeled Reclaim All. Across the city, the lights flickered. The digital accounts of every board member who had looked the other way while Marcus cheated his staff began to bleed.
Does your mother's life feel worth the wreckage of mine? I stood over him. It wasn't just Marcus who was falling. It was the entire ecosystem of greed he represented. I watched the deposit-confirmed notifications scroll across my screen. Hundreds of thousands of them. Every employee who had been denied a bonus, every family that had lost their insurance, every seeker who had been waiting for the truth. The satisfying part wasn't the money hitting my account. It was the look in Marcus's eyes when he realized that in my world,
He wasn't even a line item. He was a zero. But as Marcus was led away in chains, he started to laugh. A high, thin sound that cut through the fog. "You think this is the victory?" he shouted back at me. "Look at your screen, Architect! Look at what you've awakened!" I looked down. The Reclaim app was gone. In its place was a single, pulsing red dot on a map of Manhattan. It was moving toward my mother's hospital. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown sender. No name, no number. Just 3 words.
We see you. The Collective wasn't a group of businessmen. It was an AI, a system designed to optimize humanity by stripping away the weak. And by destroying Marcus, I hadn't just saved my mother. I had passed the final test. I was no longer just an employee. I was a candidate. I looked up at the Manhattan skyline. The skyscrapers looked like the bars of a cage. The Seekers were no longer just watching. We were being hunted. I'm the architect, and I've just realized that I didn't design the building. I designed the trap. And now, I'm the only one left inside, with the key.
The reckoning was just the beginning. You watched Marcus Sterling fall, but in the world of high finance, a king is just a target with a bigger price tag. The Collective has spent decades watching from the shadows of Manhattan. Now, they've stopped watching. They've started moving. I thought I was saving a life, but I was actually waking up the person who designed the cage in the first place. Join the hunt before you become the prey. Next episode, The Architects of the Void.